Welcome to week 1. We're going to start with the first chapter in our text, Define Crisis Communication and Issue Management. Now, chapter 2 is not required. However, if you have the time, I encourage you to read it. I'll make mention of that later in the video. Now, I encourage you to think about crisis management in theory, of course, but also, and I think even more importantly, how you as a public relations or public information practitioner can prevent crisis from escalating in your own organization. That's what we mean by issue management, or sometimes crisis communication or crisis management. A lot of words, don't get lost in the details. Focus on how you can apply it for your own organization. Okay, let's start with Selnow and Seeger 2021, Chapter 1. Again, Chapter 2 is optional. I'll make reference to it in my notes. Our authors note that it's impossible to avoid all crisis, and that's true. There are some natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, some human disasters, think terrorist actions. They can't all be avoided. Some of them can be, and all of them can be effectively managed. Now, some may claim, well, that's all good in theory, but it doesn't work in reality. But remember, theory by definition must be related to reality. Theory is simply an explanation created for something that needs further understanding. Also keep in mind, simplicity is one characteristic of a good theory. In fact, simple theories are easier to understand and certainly easier to apply. So we're not trying to make things more complex or more difficult. We use theory to make things simpler, easier to understand, and most importantly, to apply in a rational, reasonable, and effective manner. Now, because theory is essentially a tool, it should be used carefully, not only in generating, but also in forming research. And this is important in guiding your practice, whether you're a theorist and a researcher, a practitioner, or like me, you're both. Our view is that theory is a necessary component of any effort of systemic learning. We also believe that theory is critical to practice. Noted social scientist Kurt Lewin back in 1951 observed that there is nothing so practical as good theory. I mentioned Chapter 2. That quote actually came from Chapter 2. Also, Chapter 2 includes some updated examples related to COVID-19 and the pandemic. So that's one of the reasons why I thought it'd be helpful to review. Again, it's not required, but if you get the time, I think there's some helpful information and some interesting information that I think you'll find helpful. Now, this week we'll also review 2 articles. These articles are a little bit older. Some of the material, you'll notice the supplemental reading is a little bit older. And the reason for that is that crisis management has been around a while. And so some of that reading is foundational for the more updated reading that we get in our 2021 version of our text. So we'll go back to 1985, Crabble and Vivert talk about managing issues and influencing public policies. The authors explore 3 major topics. First, they look at a basic misunderstanding about issue management. Second, the management of issues status. And third, the presentation of what they call a catalytic model of issue management and policy influence. The authors also note that issues may be resolved in a sense that a temporary answer is found, but they are never solved. Okay, let me say that again. Issues may be resolved, but they are never solved. In other words, there really is no final answer. You can't just wipe your brow and go, we got through that one, and now we're done. Because there's another crisis lurking around the corner, right? There's some other issue that your organization is going to have to deal with. And so that's something to keep in mind as you move through one crisis or one issue after another. It's important to take some time and look back, learn those lessons, and then apply those lessons, because you'll want to get better as you go through your own career or as your organization continues to grow. Your authors also talk about agenda setting. Now, agenda setting does play a critical role in crisis communication. Some of you, if you're communication majors in your undergraduate degree, or perhaps you have another master's degree in communication, you're probably already familiar with agenda setting. Just as a reminder, the basic tenets of that theory are that mass media do not tell people what to think, but they can influence what people think about. So this relates to crisis communication in that activist groups, they're very skillful in attracting media attention. And the attention paid by such groups result in media coverage, agenda setting, and ultimately the actions that you'll have to take within an organization. Okay, moving on to our second supplemental piece, Gaunt and Ohlenberger talk about issues management revisited, a tool that deserves another look. This could probably be updated every decade or so because we do learn things. I mean, think about how much social media has played a role in just the past decade in terms of crisis management. And we have another week where we talk a little bit more in depth about that. But for now, the authors in this supplemental study or supplemental work talk about issue management being misunderstood. And they claim that it's confused with crisis management or risk communication. And that's all true. Here's my advice. Don't get bogged down in the details of the distinction, right? It's not the taxonomy that we're really focused on. For one, people have disagreements. I have my own definitions of crisis management, issues management, crisis communication, all those things. You'll have another researcher who may have their own slightly different definitions. What I encourage you to do is focus on how to apply it, right? Nobody in the boardroom is going to care whether you call it crisis communication or issues management. They're going to care whether or not you can help them solve their problem, right? And do so in an effective manner, based upon theory, based upon your experience. One of the examples that these authors talk about, they go all the way back to the 1978 National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And there's a Firestone case. I won't get into the details of that case study. I'll let you review that on your own. I will share just very quickly that I have had countless examples of crisis communication. You may have heard of Abu Ghraib. I was a Pentagon press officer when that story broke. And again, I won't bore you with all the details for the sake of brevity. However, I will say that we were caught off guard because we did not fully appreciate the impact that the release of those photos would have. We knew there were photos. We knew there were allegations of detainee abuse. We are the ones that announced it. I mean, it was announced over in Iraq, but we shared that announcement back at the Pentagon, and we assumed that it would take the normal course of allegations. It would be fully investigated. If anyone needed to be held accountable, they would. But we failed to appreciate how big that story would grow with the release of the photos. So always learn from those things. It's certainly one of the lessons I learned as well. And then, of course, being in the Navy, we've had ship collisions, fires at sea. We had a horrible submarine collision with a Japanese fishing trawler back when I was a spokesperson at the U.S. Pacific Fleet. And one of the things I learned there is the importance of focusing on the family. And we were very fortunate because the four-star admiral that we worked for, it was his primary focus from the beginning. It wasn't about the Navy's reputation. It wasn't about, the legal things that needed to be done. It was what can we do to help the families of these victims. Everything focused on that from the beginning. And it was a very good lesson. I was only a lieutenant commander at the time, so relatively, I guess, mid-grade, the junior officer, a new lieutenant commander. And so I learned a lot from that. And I'm sure you have your own experiences dealing with crisis communication in terms of what you can learn from those. Now, back to this study. Some executives say that they spend as much as 50% of their time on issues management, either in the form of government relations, dealing with regulatory matters, social responsibility programs, things like that. So about half the time, some leaders' report is spent on this issue, which is why, as communicators, it's important for us to understand that. Okay, so again, let me wrap it up by saying that focus on the practical uses of issue management. As we go through this course, you're going to hear a lot of theory, you're going to read a lot of theory, but think about the practical applications of that theory. All right? So, as always, stay ahead with your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and of course, most importantly, enjoy your time of learning.